Hello, I hope this story makes you think about how easily trust can be broken. Your feedback, subscription, and support are always welcome. Janet, a 62-year-old retiree, has always believed that her marriage to Thomas is an example of true love. Together they raised 2 children, built careers, and now, after retirement, plan to travel the world. But one day, her quiet life changed forever. On a typical morning, while going through her mail, Janet came across a letter that caused her concern. The envelope was addressed to Thomas, but marked confidential. Something about the letter didn't seem right. She hesitated to open it, but her anxiety took over. Inside was a document from a law firm. The text claimed that Melanie Gray, a colleague of Thomas's, was claiming part of his pension through an informal agreement. Melanie Gray, Janet whispered, not understanding what was happening. Her heart was pounding, and thousands of questions swarmed through her mind. Feeling increasingly afraid, Janet decided not to postpone the investigation. She remembered that Thomas had left his laptop in his office, and Janet turned it on, and to her surprise, the password was missing. She opened the email. There were emails dating back several years. One of them was from Melanie. Thomas, you promised that after retirement we could build a life together. I believe you will fulfill your promise. Your support means everything to me. Janet's hands were shaking. She reread the letters, tears streaming down her cheeks. When Thomas returned home, he saw Janet sitting on the couch with the papers in her hands, her eyes reddened with tears. What is this, Thomas? She asked, showing him the letters. Her voice was filled with pain and anger. Thomas tried to justify himself. It's just a misunderstanding, Janet. Melanie is exaggerating. There was nothing serious between us. But Janet knew it was a lie. She could feel their world, which she thought was solid, beginning to crumble. Janet couldn't understand how the man she had lived with for most of her life could hide something like this. She could feel her trust in Thomas crumbling by the minute. I want to know the whole truth, she said. How long has this been going on? And why is this woman claiming my money? Thomas lowered his eyes. His silence only increased her suspicions. How could you do this to me? Janet exclaimed, breaking down. Thomas could not answer. The tension in the room was unbearable. Janet knew this was only the beginning. Thomas's past had always been a mystery to Janet. She knew there had been difficult moments in his life, but she could never have imagined that they would have affected their marriage to this extent. Thomas was a man of strong character. In his youth, he worked several jobs to support his family. Responsibility and hard work had always been his main traits. He grew up in a small town in Texas where poverty was common. His father was a mechanic, and his mother worked as a janitor. Thomas always wanted to break out of this vicious circle. His life path changed when he received a scholarship and was able to go to college. It was there that he met Janet. Their love was like a fairy tale. But as it turned out, Thomas never shared all the details of his life with her. Janet and Thomas met at a party. She immediately noticed his confident look and friendly smile. She was captivated by his charisma and sincerity. You are someone who has always dreamed of more, Janet said as they planned their future. Together they built careers, raised children, and created a family nest. Thomas worked as an engineer for a large corporation, and Jeanette was a teacher. They always supported each other, and their life seemed perfect. But there was something that Thomas always hid. After they got married, Thomas started working on large projects that required frequent business trips. He always said it was for their dream together, a carefree retirement. Over time, however, Janet noticed that Thomas was becoming increasingly withdrawn. His phone calls and long evenings at the office began to raise suspicions. He often mentioned his co-worker Melanie. At first, Janet paid no attention. It's just work, he assured her. Melanie was 15 years younger and always sought Thomas' support. Her career depended on his recommendations, and they worked on many projects together. But was their relationship purely professional? Janet began to recall small details, an expensive perfume that Thomas brought back from a business trip, a card with the signature. Thank you for everything, Thomas. You are the best! She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now these little things were adding up to a disturbing picture. Their children Emily and Jacob had always been the pride of their parents. They grew up in an atmosphere of love and support. Emily became a doctor, and Jacob started his own business. They believed that their parents were a perfect couple. But how would they react if they found out about Thomas' infidelity? Janet sat in her room, remembering every moment of their life together. Her mind was filled with doubts. Have I been blind all this time? Could I have prevented this? Jeanette had always believed that Thomas was honest with her, but after the recent events, she began to search for answers. Her suspicions were confirmed when she found an email from Melanie in his inbox. Thank you for a wonderful evening. You always know how to support me. The message read. Her heart sank. What kind of evening was this? Why didn't he tell her about it? Janet started checking Thomas's phone and found even more photos, messages that he had deleted, but not thoroughly enough. One of the hardest things for Jeanette to deal with happened during a chance meeting at Thomas's office. She had decided to bring him lunch when she saw Melanie coming out of his office, smiling and with her arm around his shoulder. "Hi, Janet, I've heard a lot about you," Melanie said, keeping her demeanor casual. Janet forced herself to smile back, but inside she was in a flurry of emotions. She felt like an outsider in her own marriage. Looking through the receipts and bank statements, Janet noticed some strange expenses. Hotels where Thomas had supposedly stayed during his business trips were twice as expensive as she had expected. She called one of the hotels to clarify the details and heard that the room was booked for 2 people. "This can't be true," she whispered as she held the phone. Janet decided to talk to a colleague of Thomas who often mentioned his work. Often travels with Melanie," the man said, not even realizing the pain these words were causing Janet. This information was the last piece of the puzzle that connected all her suspicions. That evening, Janet could not keep silent any longer. "Thomas, I need to know the truth. Who is Melanie to you?" Thomas denied it at first, but when he saw his wife's tears and the evidence she had gathered, he finally confessed. It was a mistake. I didn't want you to find out this way," he said. Looking down, Janet felt her heart break. Anger, pain, betrayal all mixed together. A mistake. "Thomas, this is our life. How could you betray me after everything we've been through together?" Thomas tried to justify himself, but his words only made things worse. Janet and Thomas' story has now completely changed. She is no longer sure if she wants to stay with him, but she is not yet ready to make a final decision. It took Janet a long time to decide to have this conversation, and after the truth about Thomas's infidelity was revealed, she felt that she could not leave it unanswered. She found Melanie through social media, looking at photos of her perfect life. It was unbearable. So Janet called and arranged a meeting at a coffee shop near Thomas's office. When Melanie arrived, she looked confident and even a little cocky. "You wanted to talk. Well, I'm here," she said, sitting down across from Janet with a slight smile. Janet felt her heart beat faster. She tried to remain calm, even though her emotions were running high. "I just want to understand one thing, Melanie, why?" How could you do this, knowing that Thomas is married?" Melanie was in no hurry to answer. She took a sip of coffee as if she was weighing her words. "Why? Maybe because Thomas never seemed happy around you. And with me, he was finally being himself," she answered without hesitation. Melanie's words came as a blow to Jeanette. She had always believed that her marriage to Thomas was strong, despite all the difficulties. You have no idea what we've been through together, and that doesn't give you the right to take my husband away from me," Janet said, her voice trembling with emotion. Melanie shrugged her shoulders. You are entitled to your feelings, but Thomas has made his choice, and, to be honest, he told me about your problems, how you were always criticizing him, how you never appreciated his efforts." These words made Janet angry, but they also made her think. Could she really have been ignoring the problems in her marriage? "What about my efforts, Melanie?" Do you think it's easy to live with a man who is always at work, who is oblivious to your needs? I tried to be strong for both of us." Melanie listened in silence. For the first time in a while, Her face became serious. I'm not trying to justify myself, but Thomas really felt different with me. He said he could breathe around me. You took not only my husband, but my trust in people, Janet said. Her voice became determined, and she felt a surge of strength. Melanie looked at her in surprise. It may not matter to you, but I never meant to hurt you. It just happened by itself. After this encounter, Janet realizes that she will have to find a way to move on with her life, even if the pain will stay with her forever. But will she have the strength to fight for her future? After meeting with Melanie, Janet realized that verbal arguments would not help her regain control of the situation. She turned to a lawyer specializing in family law to find out how to protect her financial interests. Janet, the situation is difficult, but you have a strong position. Your husband had no right to draw on your pension without your consent, the lawyer said, flipping through the papers. These words gave Janet hope, but she realized that she was in for a long and exhausting fight. The lawyer examined Thomas's financial documents and discovered that the man had not only concealed his relationship with Melanie, but had also entered into several questionable transactions using joint funds. Your husband has spent a significant portion of your savings on travel, expensive gifts, and even an investment in a shell company, the lawyer said, pointing to the numbers. Janet felt deceived for the second time. She had no idea how far Thomas' actions had gone. The first hearing was tense. Thomas had hired a lawyer to try to prove that all the expenses were agreed upon and that Janet was exaggerating the extent of the problem. My client only wanted to provide for his family. He had no malicious intent, Thomas' lawyer said. But Janet knew this was not true. Her lawyer insisted that she had not authorized the use of her pension. At one of the court hearings, Melanie suddenly appeared in court. She said she was ready to testify in Thomas's favor. I've been by Thomas' side through the most difficult times, and I know he acted with the best of intentions, she said, not looking at Janet. This came as a blow to Janet. She realized that Melanie was not only destroying her marriage, but also trying to rob her of her financial stability. During the hearing, Janet's lawyer presented new evidence, recordings of conversations between Thomas and Melanie that showed they were planning to manipulate Janet's finances for their own benefit. Your Honor, these recordings clearly show that Thomas and Melanie acted intentionally, the lawyer said. The judge suspended the hearing to review the new evidence. This was an important victory for Janet, but the fight was not over. Thomas looked confused. He did not expect his actions to be revealed in court. Janet, you're making a circus out of this. We could have handled this differently, he said after the hearing. And you should have thought of that before, Janet replied, unable to contain her anger. The trial is ongoing, and Janet is preparing for the next round of the fight. But can she win and protect her pension? Janet's trial against Thomas and his mistress Melanie was nearing its climax. Tensions were running high as new and unexpected facts began to surface. Janet was dealing not only with legal issues, but also with emotional overload. But the worst was yet to come. At the next court hearing, Janet's lawyer called a witness who came as a surprise to everyone present. It was a former colleague of Thomas's, a man who had worked with him for many years and knew all his secrets. Your Honor, I am prepared to testify that Thomas had long been planning to embezzle Janet's funds. He often said that her pension was his guarantee for a carefree life, the witness said. This confession caused a shock in the courtroom. Melanie, who was sitting next to Thomas, looked confused. The witness, also provided documents proving that Thomas had invested funds from Janet's pension in risky investments without informing her. These transactions were completely illegal, and Thomas knew he was acting against his wife's best interests, the witness added. Janet felt a mixture of anger and relief. Finally, the truth was coming out, but at the same time, it meant that her trust in her husband had been destroyed forever. Thomas tried to justify himself. It's all an exaggeration. I only wanted to ensure a better future for both of us, he said, addressing the judge, but his words rang hollow. The judge noted that Thomas's actions contradicted his excuses. "Thomas, your actions do not match your words. You used your wife's trust for your own benefit," the judge said. After the witness's statement, Melanie suddenly broke down. "I didn't know all this. Thomas told me he had every right to the money. I never wanted it to go this far," she said, barely holding back her tears. This came as an unexpected blow to Thomas. His ally was now his enemy. Janet sat silently, listening to everything that was happening. She felt bitter but also relieved. Her struggle for the truth had begun to bear fruit, but it did not diminish the pain of betrayal. "It's not just about money. It's about the trust you broke," she told Thomas when the hearing ended. The court hearing ends, but the tension between Janet, Thomas, and Melanie only grows. After all the events that unfolded in court, Janet was faced with the most difficult choice of her life. Her heart was torn between her desire for justice and her desire to put the past behind her. At home, sitting in the silence of her living room, Janet looked through old photos. They showed moments of happiness that now seemed like a distant illusion. "How could I not notice that Thomas was hiding so much of his life from me?" she thought. Her thoughts jumped back and forth between the past and the present. It hurt to think about how they had built a future together that was now destroyed. The next day, Janet met with her lawyer. "Your case has a strong chance of winning, but it will take time and effort," the lawyer said. I just want to know if it's worth it. Is there any point in fighting for something if it only brings pain?" she asked. The lawyer suggested that she think about her own future, not just justice. Janet decided to share her thoughts with her longtime friend Linda. "You have the right to be happy even after all this," Linda said as she handed Janet a cup of tea. Her words gave Janet a lot to think about. She realized that her choice was not just about money or justice, but about how she wanted to live her life. In the evening, Janet received a call from Melanie. "I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I want to help you," she said. Janet was stunned. It was an offer she hadn't expected. Melanie wanted to provide evidence that could help Janet with her case, but at the same time, her voice sounded sincere. All these events made Janet stop and think. Should she accept help from someone who was part of her pain? Could she trust Melanie? She stood in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. "My life will never be the same again, but I can choose what it will be like from now on," she told herself. After many months of struggle, frustration, and inner reflection, Janet made a decision that would change her life. But it was only the beginning of a new journey, one full of challenges and hope. The trial is over. Janet won her case, but it was a bittersweet victory. She received compensation and restored her right to a pension, but the feeling of betrayal still hurt. "Your persistence and honesty deserve respect," the judge said at the last hearing. Janet thanked the lawyer, but inside she felt that this would not bring her peace of mind. Melanie decided to meet with Janet after the trial was over. "I know that nothing can make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm sorry," she said. Janet listened intently, trying to understand whether her words were sincere. Maybe we will never be friends, but I don't want my life to be marred by hatred," Janet replied. This conversation was the beginning of the end of the conflict for both of them. At home, Janet decided to get rid of things that reminded her of the pain. She sorted through old boxes of documents and photos. Among the memories, she found a letter from Thomas, written many years ago. In it, he promised her to always be honest and support her. "I guess life is too complicated for everything to go according to plan," she thought as she put the letter in the box. Janet realized that she no longer wanted to stay in her old house. She decided to sell it and move to a small town by the ocean. "This will be my place to reboot," she told her friend Linda. Preparing for the move gave her a new purpose. Before she left, Janet met a longtime family friend who had long offered to help her. "If you need support or advice, you can always count on me," he said. These words reminded Janet that even in the darkest of times, there are always people who are willing to help. Janet arrived at her new home. It was a small cottage overlooking the ocean. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe deeply. "This is the place for a new life, new feelings, and new decisions," she thought as she stood on the veranda.